Basically, what I'm trying to convey is the picture that I paint of him is a man who is pursuing with everything at his means, and as he goes along, he's losing things.
Mm-hmm. He's an iconoclast, and he just keeps smashing icons, and
exactly.
And he's ruthless, and he doesn't hesitate to burn bridges if he feels like the bridges are not worth crossing again.
Exactly.
Right.
So here he is. He's basically run the thread out. He's still going to see Jiddu Krishnamurti. Uh-huh. He has now begun to avoid Krishnamurti because his situation is dire. Krishnamurti knows that his wife has since died now. Yuji was in London when he got the news that his wife died. Mm-hmm. His kids are scattered to the winds. And young family, too. We're not talking. So now he's in London, and he's really down and out. He meets Jiddu for the last time. He says to him, why have I wasted all these years? If there's nothing you can teach me to get me to that place, then I've wasted my time. So he doesn't see him again in person, but he continues. He meets at some point when he gets really down and out. He's in Geneva looking for a bank account where he thought he had some money. Now he's got nothing. He's got a hotel bill that's unpaid. He goes to the Indian consulate. He meets a woman who offers to give him shelter, basically. And this is Valentine, an older Swiss woman who he spent the next 14 years traveling with, maybe longer, 61 to like 96 or something, somewhere around those dates, whatever. Anyway, he meets this lady. She says, I'll take care of you. Don't worry about it. He doesn't go back to India. Instead, every summer, he goes and listens to Jiddu Krishnamurti again.
In Switzerland.
In Switzerland.
Mm-hmm.
Meanwhile, things are beginning to happen to him physically. He's having experiences like a Kundalini experience where, the energy is coming up through the spine and there's all these descriptions of it, whatever. Finally, in 1967, he's sitting in the tent listening to Jiddu in Saanen, Switzerland, and Jiddu is talking about the comparative mind. And he's talking about there's a silence. If you've been following what I'm saying, you'll find that there's a silence. And in that silence, there's an energy. And in that energy, there's an action. And that action, you cannot know. So Yuji's listening to this after all these years and all this loss, and he's sitting there. And
that's very profound, actually. I mean, maybe it's a tangent, but action within silence is a very interesting thing to talk about. But continue on, though. I don't want to interrupt your story.
Well, it is key, Rick, because if there's an action, and when I read that, when I listened to him describe this, I thought, this is why no matter how you speak of it, what you say about it, any description of the spiritual state, whatever it may be, is always secondary. Okay, we all know that. Fine. So he's sitting there listening, and he's struck by the fact that he's been fooling himself, calling what he's experiencing a silent mind, because the only way to describe a silent mind is by using a mind that's not silent at all. Mm-hmm. It's saying silence, so there's a word, so there's a noise, so there's silence. So this kind of gets him to this corner that he can't get out of. He walks out of the tent. I guess it was the last talk of the season. He goes back and he's sitting there on a bench, and he said, he suddenly feels all these funny feelings. Like, is this the state that they've all been describing? This is what Jesus was in, or Buddha was in? But if it is, how would I know? How would I know? And at that point, he says, or said, the question just stopped. It wasn't resolved. It wasn't answered. The question just stopped pestering him, I guess. And at that point, he went home, laid down, and some kind of physical death process happened where he was fighting to keep his consciousness awake, and it closed like a black aperture. And this is when his friend came over, the woman Valentine, who knew nothing about all this Indian stuff and was not a spiritual person in the sense, she wasn't a seeker, but she was a radical. She had been involved with the Paris art scene and all the rest. So they were living in the same building, and she sees him on the couch looking really whack-out, and what is he doing over there? So she calls this young friend of theirs, Douglas, and he comes over, and Yuji is lying on the couch in the bow posture, completely out of it. And he says, Yuji, what's going on? And then he somehow brought him back. And apparently what happened to him, as he described it, is that when the thought stopped, when the questioning stopped, there was a kind of, I mean, this is my word, but there was like a rebooting of the physical system. You know, the chakras that are described represent glands. We all know that by now. And these things kind of got recharged. And why that question did it to him, and why that, you know, day in the tent did it to him, and how exactly that happened. I mean, all the stuff that he had done, the meditation, the yoga, the, you know, leaving this, that getting taken away, this getting taken away, all that happened. But at one point, how do you figure out exactly what made that event? So after that event, the physical changes started in his body. And that's a lot of what the first book that he allowed published about him describes, is, you know, this unblinking thing, and, you know, a death process, the ionization of thought. He describes all these things in a very scientific way, in a sense, you know, like it's the body. It's something that happens in the body when thought, which is this kind of servant which has taken over the house, is naturally put back into its place, where it's fine, it functions, it works, you know what you're doing, you know where you are, you can speak and operate in the world, but it's not constantly pestering you with, that's a red chair, that's Rick Archer, this is Louis Brawley, I'm sitting in the living room, what's going to happen tomorrow, why am I getting what I need, am I getting what I need, you know, all this worrying stuff is suddenly gone. He used to say, if that stops, then the body will restructure and you'll live a natural existence. So that, I don't know if that answers the question well, but
no, that's good.